So far, we've made 3 videos about Python OOP. The first video we defined object-oriented programming, explained what is a class and an object, and explained how to create them. The second video we explained the special init method that allows us to create instance variables. We explained what is self, how to create instance and class or static variables. The third video we explained the 3 different types of methods like instance, class, and static methods. Today we will explain an important concept in OOP called inheritance. A simple metaphor to explain this concept is the following. Your parents' house is considered your house too. This is inheritance. You inherited something from your parents. We can do the same thing in OOP. That means a class can inherit something from another class. The purpose of inheritance in OOP is that if you want to have the same features of a certain class in another class, instead of redefining them, you can inherit them. Let's create a class called parents. Next, let's create the init method. And this init method will have self as parameter with name and house. And let's create the instance variable self.name equal to name, and self.house is equal to the value of the house parameter. Okay, now I will create 2 getter methods. So these are simple methods. It returns self.name and this method returns self.house. Okay, let me create the parent object. So parents equal to parents, and inside parentheses I'll mention the name. So let's say the parents' name are David and Julia, and their house, let's call the house Smith Residence. Now I'll create another class called child, and this child class, let's say it will have a init method and it will take self as parameter and the name of child. Let's say child name, and I will say self.child name equal to child name. Okay, now let me cut this and paste it down there. Let's keep our objects here right here under the classes, and now I'll say child equal to child. I'm creating my child object, and the name of the child, let's say, will be John. Okay, now how can a class inherit something from another class? Let's say I want child to inherit parents. All I need to do is mention inside parentheses the class that I want to inherit. So child right now is inheriting parents, and this is inheritance. And when a class inherits a other class, it inherits all the features like attributes and methods. And if you want to keep in mind a better terminology, you can say for the class that inherits something or inherits another class, you can say it is called a subclass. Okay, and the class it inherits from is called the superclass. So instead of parent and child, you can say subclass or superclass. Now, if I go down there and say child dot, as you can see, it inherits the get house, get parent. It also inherits the attributes house and name. So the child class or subclass inherits all the features, meaning attributes and methods of the superclass or parents class. Now, this is called single level inheritance. There's also multi-level inheritance. I'll create a class called other class, and this class inherits the child class. Let's say there's nothing inside this class for now, and for the class child, I'll create a method. Let's call it method 1, and it won't have anything inside. Now let me create an object of the other class. So I'm going to say other equal to other class, and parentheses is the constructor of the other class. And now let me say other dot. As you can see, it inherits first of all the method 1 of the child class, but also inherits the methods and attributes of the class that the child class inherits. So basically, what can you think of here is that this class is the grandparent of this class, and this class is the parent of this class. So basically, the child inherits from the parents, and because the parent class actually inherits from another class, this child class will inherit from this class also. This is multi-level inheritance. Let us see multiple level inheritance. Let us say this class or class child doesn't inherit anything, and the other class actually inherits parents class as well as child class. And yes, a class can inherit multiple classes. And this is called multi-level inheritance, where a class can inherit multiple other classes. And if I go down to other dot, as you can see, it inherits all the other classes. It inherits parents class, like the attributes and the methods, as well as the child class, its methods and attribute. This is multiple level inheritance. Now I know I've changed a few stuff in this program. That's because I want to explain something else. We know that the child class is inheriting the features like attributes and methods of the parents class, right? Okay, and now I've created two objects. Let me first of all comment this object out, and let's leave this object here. We know also that the init method is called automatically as soon as you create an object. So right now, if I launch my code, this print statement should be executed, and it is executed, of course, because the init method is called automatically. Now let's say if I comment this out, if I take the comment off of this, and inside its own init, I'll say something like print, and I'll say let's say in child init, okay? I added this print statement just to separate the view and the console. So let's launch the program, and first, let's see what will happen. So the parent init will be executed for this object. However, this object will have its own init executed, of course. So even if it is inheriting something from a parent or a superclass, its own init will be executed, right? But what if I want to execute the init of the superclass within the subclass? How can I do it? Well, there's a special method we can use called super. Super allows us to access the features like attributes and methods of a superclass, and that's why it's called super. So with super, I could access the init method of the superclass, which is parents. So like this, I'll be able to access the init method. So the init method of the superclass actually prints in parent init. So will I be able to print this print statement within this object? Let's see. If I launch the code, as you can see, this was printed because of this object. Then this was printed right here, and then we go to the child object. As you can see, because of the super method, and we've called the init method of the superclass using the super method, we were able to actually print this print statement within the child or subclass, as you can see here right now. And of course, it printed its own print statement like in child init, okay? So I wanted to explain super for you, how super works. So super allows us to access the features of a superclass, okay? And further on this video, we will see some more examples on super. Now let's explain the concept of MRO, or method resolution order. As you can see in front of you, I've added other class, and this class inherits both parents and child class. This is called multiple level inheritance, okay? Now, as you can see, there's the objects right over here. And I want to ask you a question. We know that the init method, of course, is launched automatically as soon as you create an object. This object over here, it has its own init method, but it says super.init. It accesses the init method of the superclass. But we have two classes over here, so it inherits from two classes. Which class do you think the init method will be executed? The parents class or the child class? Let's see. Let me launch my code. Okay, as you can see, in parent init for this object, then for this object right here in child init. But then, as you can see here, when this line was executed, the init method of the parent class was called, but not the child class. And of course, the in other class init is for this class. So what I want you to understand here is that the operations are executed from left to right. You can see an image in front of you right now where other class is pointing to two different classes. You can see parents class is on the left and child is on the right. So basically the execution flow goes from left to right. That is why the init method of the parent class was executed instead of the child init. And this is method resolution order. Let's go back to the code that we saw in the beginning of the video, and let's try to print this simple phrase, okay? Now, as you can see, child inherits the parents class, and it inherits all the features like attributes and method of this class. In this part of this video, we want to explain furthermore the super method that we saw earlier, okay? Now, when we say a class inherits something from another class, we're saying that it inherits the attributes and methods. My point here is that the child class has a copy of the attributes of the superclass because it inherits the attributes of a superclass. So what I mean here, inside the init of the child class, we need to also mention the name and house attributes of the superclass. And we need to go down there, of course, in the constructor and mention them also. But instead of copy and pasting, I can use the, well, let's say the methods of this parent class. I could say parents dot get parent name, and this will return for me this value. Okay, so instead of copy and pasting, I'm using the methods. It's smarter. And let's say parents.getHouse, it will return for me the value, which is Smith residence. Okay, so those extra lines right now that we've added are arguments for these parameters. Okay, so this is the correct way of writing the init method of a class that inherits another class. So you need to mention the attributes of the class it inherited from. Now, we forgot to add the super method. The super method also allows us to access attributes. So what we can do here, we can say init, and inside the init we can mention name and house. So we know that the super method allows us to access the super class, and with this notation that we just wrote right now, this allows us to access the attributes of the parents class or the super class. So right now I'm going to define a method called information. And let's say it will take, of course, it will take self, and I will print a simple print statement using an f string. I will print the following lines. So self.child name, this allows us to access the child name, of course, of the object. And I will say something like is the child. And we need to mention the parent's name, but we'll do that later. Let me continue the phrase, and they live in, we need to mention the house name, okay? Now inside this curly brackets, what will we do? I will show you that the super method can access also methods. So what you can do is say super dot, and you can actually use the methods of the super class. So because I want to get the parent's name, I will use the get parent name. And here I could use the super method to access the other method, which is the get house. So I could write get house or copy this. Okay, and let us actually launch this method. So to call a method, we need to mention the object, of course, and mention the method name, which is information. Let me launch my code. As you can see, John is the child of David and Julia, and they live in Smith residence. And this is it on inheritance in Python. I hope you enjoyed this video and learned something new. Make sure to subscribe and follow me in this Python object-oriented programming tutorial. Now I invite you to watch one of these end screens that will appear right now, and I hope to see you in one of them.